G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Preparing for the the first dog on the moon, and this will be the dag end of the outsiders.
Oh my God, he's been sitting.
Perhaps policy comes next, and that'll be the big test. We may get a chance as a group to discuss this as time wears on. There's a promise for you. We'll come back and reconvene and reconsider. Thanks to everybody this morning. Political scientist, Associate Professor Sarah Madison, Alex Lee from BuzzFeed, politics reporter, and Georgina Downer. She's Director of Diplomacy at AsiaLink at the University of Melbourne. Dog coming up, and a warning: the following segment contains elements of Whitney Houston.
You listen to the Australian government. Hello, Patriots, and welcome to First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. I'm the Walkley Award-winning editorial cartoonist for The Guardian Australia, First Dog on the Moon. This week, a grateful nation found itself host to Tony Abbott's farewell tour. It's Tony's last drinks, his final outing, all aboard the last hurrah. He's climbing the stairway to heaven. That's right, Australia. Stairway to Heaven is just one of the classic hits you'll hear when the former Prime Minister takes to the stage in one-term Tony's no wrecking, undermining or sniping classic hits farewell tour. Here's some of his best-loved songs.
I did it my way.
Remember this one?
Yes, you can sail the seven seas.
And who could forget?
Lead me this way.
And of course, the instant hit written just for Tony by Broadway legend Andrew Bolt. Andrew was so upset after writing this song, he extruded apophagy. Tony is taking his goodbye love bus on the highways and byways of the nation, bidding au revoir to every radio and television station in the land except the ABC. He's even going to Mars. That wasn't water that NASA discovered on Mars this week. That was Tony's tears. Oh, I'm just kidding. It's a rollicking rock and roll road trip as Tony navigates his Nope-mobile right around the country. And it starts today. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We're crossing now live to the Ray Hadley Ballroom at the Rooty Hill RSL, where a huge crowd has gathered for this kick-off concert to bid farewell to the nation's buffest Prime Minister ever. Now, we understand that Tony Abbott will be taking the stage shortly. I've got two audience members here. In fact, they seem to be the audience. Hello, it's Craig. Hello, it's down here. Hello, can you tell us what's happening?
Tony is about to take the stage and we're very excited.
And is there a big crowd?
Oh, yes, it's enormous.
It's as big as a crowd as I have ever seen. And how many people do you think? Just a rough estimate.
I don't know. At least two. There's me, I'm Craig.
And I'm Darren. Leonard said he'd be along later and he's going to bring Gordon.
So that'll be four.
Well, 3 people and Gordon, who's an alpaca.
Shut up, Darren.
That's not a huge turnout. We've heard a lot lately about support dropping for the Liberal Party since the leadership change, but there seems to be even less support for Tony.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm planning to resign from the Liberal Party in my hundreds, even though there's just one of me.
It's a mass exodus of two. Yes, two. But we don't care about that. We're just here to see Tony. Tony, 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 Tony.
What are you doing, Darren?
I'm so excited. I'm going to throw my underpants on the stage.
No, you mustn't. We need them. Didn't you get that letter from Brian Loughnane?
No, what did it say?
It said, please send us your support.
Oh, well, I'll put them in a postpack. Thanks for listening, Patriots. This has been First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living, brought to you by the First Dog on the Moon Institute.
Thanks, Dog. That's it for RN Sunday Extra this week. The Sunday Extra podcast, that's there. The last hours on SoundCloud. Producer, Sepal Chanel. Michelle.
Well, yeah. So guns are back in the news, eh? Right before his downfall, Tony Abbott's government was being sort of shaken and rocked around a bit by some idiot who wanted to import, I think it was an Italian, but it might have been just an Italian name on an American-built shotgun. But it was a 7-round lever-action shotgun, and they were getting really upset because nobody wanted to give them an exception or a permit to bring it in, despite the fact that it had 7 rounds. Because here in Australia, shotguns are only allowed to have 2-shot magazines. Double barrel guns are not affected whether they're side by side or over and under. But if you in possession of a 5 or a 7 round pump action shotgun or a lever action shotgun or one of the semi-automatic shotguns that were made for either riot control or defending the planet from vicious attacks of small clay ashtrays, or perhaps shooting down squadrons of ducks while they're trying to land on the local waterhole. There were semi-automatic shotguns in the country, but they all got, there's no semi-automatic long arms allowed to the civilian population in Australia. If you're a member of a pistol shooting club, you can get a license to own a handgun, and that can be an air pistol, it can be a rimfire pistol, it can be a centerfire pistol. There's a category of competition known as a service match. And a service match pistol means that people in civilian life are permitted to own a handgun that's designed to stop people at a distance of, 25 feet and make sure that they can't come any closer than 15, sort of thing. They're pretty significant weapons, and that generally means your automatic pistols based on the 1911 Colt, the M909. Was it? Yeah. Anyway, the 45 caliber Colt automatic pistol is spent 50 or 60 years being the gun of choice. The British military was into revolvers. I can remember when the New South Wales police used to be issued with revolvers, and the story was that police forces who had semi-automatic handguns quite often left the safety catch on, and you'd find the dead policeman underneath his car surrounded by unfired ammunition that he'd just been racking the slide and trying to pull the trigger with a safety catch on. Whereas revolvers, at least they fired. They might only have 6 shots in them, but they fired. But yeah, since the 1970s, the weapons of choice have really been the semi-automatic handguns because they have so many more bullets. I think the Glock's got 16 shots in the magazine. So we were rewarded on Friday afternoon by the news that there were 2 people dead out the front of the Parramatta police station. First they said that one of them was a policeman, then that policeman had shot one of them. Now it turns out that there was a 58-year-old police accountant who'd worked there for 17 years who walked out of the building at the end of his shift ready to go home, and a 15-year-old kid jumped up or walked up behind him and put a gun to his head and shot him. 1 shot with a revolver, bang, 1 innocent victim. Whereupon, if you do that at police headquarters, you've got to expect the place is going to be crawling with people who have got guns on their belts or in their shoulder holsters or whatnot. So what Andrew Scipione, the police commissioner, anyway, what Scipione said was that special constables emerged from the buildings and the offices and the hallways and the woodwork, and they had a bit of an impromptu gunfight. And surprise, surprise, a 15-year-old with 1 revolver cannot outshoot a bunch of special constables with 16-shot Glocks. Especially as the special constables have all been trained, shooting against holograms on village firefighting mock-up replica buildings, with targets and little old ladies and women with pushchairs and babies popping out of various rooms. So they got really good, honed, conditioned responses. They're not reflexes, they're conditioned responses. And somebody makes bang bang noises and they pull their death machine out and they go looking for somebody who's holding a death machine, who's not identified as on their side, and they just start putting holes in them. And they can probably put holes in a 15-year-old from about 50 metres out with a Glock, if you know what you're doing. So the 15-year-old didn't last long. And whereas if Tony Abbott had still been the Prime Minister, I'd say by now the Parramatta Mosque would have been burned to the bloody ground because of how Tony Abbott and his security mad, paranoid, anti-Muslim regime were handling everything. You know, when some 14-year-old kid in England started ringing up an 18-year-old in Australia and trying to G him up to go and cut policemen's heads off on Anzac Day, the 18-year-old got arrested by 67 cops and 3 helicopters or whatever it took. They put him in maximum security for 6 months, 9 months, 6 months, I think. They finally withdrew all the terrorism charges against him because he wasn't planning anything. He was just talking with a lunatic on the other side of the world. But he did have a machete in his bedroom, or he did cop a weapons charge. But he's out on bail and they haven't decided whether he's guilty of the weapons charge. The kid in England, the 14-year-old in England, he's probably 15 by now, but he got sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 5 years. So if by the time he's 20 he's woken up to himself, they'll let him out. But if he decides to keep, entrenched in his radical Islamic jihadist position, they won't let him out at all. He'll probably become a pretty good preacher and recruiter for Muslims in British prisons. But then Malcolm of the Turning Bull said, calm down, it's just one 15-year-old with a gun. And it's a rare week that you don't hear of somebody doing a drive-by shooting in either Sydney or Melbourne or the Gold Coast or Perth or Adelaide. Now, ever since there was a crooked bunch working in a post office and another different crooked bunch working in customs, was at least 500, maybe 1,000 handguns came into New South Wales a couple of years ago, and they're all circulating on the streets. Most of the teenagers who get a hold of a gun, they just want to shoot some inanimate object, at the front of a house and scare people. But they too could run around and put it to the back of somebody's head and make what they think of as a political statement. But thankfully, Malcolm Turning Bull didn't handle it like that. And then over there in the excited states in Oregon, some 26-year-old or whatever he was it 6 guns found on his corpse or 7? Because if it was 6, then he had 7 at home. And if it was 7 found on him, then he had 6 spare ones back at home. And the Americans who are in favour of having guns are deeply upset at the idea that all the rest of the Americans, because 3/4 of the Americans do not own a gun. 1/4 of the Americans owns enough guns for there to be enough guns for one for every person. So the average gun owner in America owns 3 or 4. So there are some gun owners with only 1, maybe a lot of them, and there are some gun owners who've got 27 different ones, to pick from. And they just can't get it through their head that it is the act of a delusional paranoiac to carry a weapon, a death machine, on the off chance that you might want to kill somebody with it later on in the day. I don't see how that can be considered a self-defensive weapon. To need defense, somebody has to attack you first. If somebody attacks you with a toothpick, you're entitled to draw your own toothpick and sword fight with toothpicks. You are entitled, if you haven't got a toothpick of your own, you're entitled to grab a hold of them by the wrist and overpower them and wrestle them around until their toothpick sews their nose together or jabs their bloody eyes out. Right? That is you defending yourself from their attack with their toothpick. If you remove their toothpick and then use it to poke their eyes out or sew their nose together, that is not you defending yourself. That is you attacking them with a toothpick because they haven't got one anymore. Essentially, you're supposed to wait until somebody attacks you if they're going to, and then improvise a defence, and then it is self-defence. If you're carrying a gun in the hope that somebody attacks you because you really want to see what it feels like to shoot somebody, so you'll go and make a prick of yourself in the hope of provoking an attack, Trayvon Martin case comes to mind, then yeah, I don't think that's self-defense. I think that's incitement. But anyway, time's up. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.